All right, we're live. Welcome everyone to Being Patient's Live Talk. I'm Nicholas Chan, reporter at Being Patient, and today we have Michael Ellenbogen, author of From the Corner Office to Alzheimer's, and we'll be speaking with him about his journey living with dementia. So, thank you, Michael, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicholas.
It's my pleasure. And yeah, Michael, I think to start off with, can you tell us a little bit, about the inspiration behind writing your book? And that was published quite some years ago. Then can you tell us about, what inspired you first to write that book?
Sure. I have to tell you, though, it wasn't really an inspiration that I wanted to do because the book was really to identify some of the poor, I guess, solutions that our medical folks had. And like I said, it's not something you really want to go out there and write about, but I thought that if I was experiencing the issues and problems trying to get a diagnosis for my particular issue, I figured there was many other people who were also struggling. And part of my solution is not only to complain about the problem, but as you saw in the end of the book, I also try to give people a way to figure out ways to resolve the issues that they might run into. So it was really a twofold reasons for creating it, but my main reason was really to hopefully try to change the medical system and to improve it.
Right. And also to provide a roadmap for people going through similar challenges, right? To give them a roadmap of how to navigate all the challenges in the medical system, right?
Oh, absolutely. I wanted people to know that they weren't alone. If they were running into the same issues that I was running into, it wasn't just them. And I got to tell you, since that time, I've run into so many people who have gone down the same road that it's kind of scary, to be honest with you.
Right. Same road as in having lots of difficulties, getting an accurate diagnosis of whatever dementia they have or problems or any type of neurodegenerative disease. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. In fact, I was just talking to a woman a couple of weeks ago, and they recently changed the clarifications of MCI, Alzheimer's, and things like that. I don't remember what the codes were for that, but what they ended up doing was they reclassified this woman as having MCI. And here's a woman who has trouble getting dressed, could no longer cook. She was having multiple problems with her daily life, and yet they said she had MCI. I mean, that's pretty scary. That is really scary when you have doctors out there making decisions that could impact the benefits that you're entitled to. And what I mean by that is like SSDI, and you can't collect them because you don't have the right classification for what is physically wrong with you.
Right. And, before we talk about, some of the personal challenges that you went through in getting a diagnosis and the ongoing ambiguity that you still face about your Alzheimer's diagnosis. Let's talk a little bit about, the early symptoms of dementia that you started experiencing, and that you were only 39 and working when you started experiencing those symptoms. Can you tell us a little bit about your situation at the time when you're 39, what were some of the early symptoms and what were some of the challenges that you face at work when those symptoms appeared?
Sure. I have to tell you that, when I think back at that time, that was one of the great highlights of my life. I was just starting to peak in my career. I worked for a Fortune 500 company, and the company was 70,000 people. And I was in charge of the data centers, all the telephones, computers, all the infrastructure for all the buildings up and down the East Coast. And I was kind of the go-to guy in the corporation. When there was an issue, they all came to me. I mean, it had to end with me. You know, I had to have the answers. And that was kind of good on the one hand, but once you start struggling to come up with the right creative ideas that you always have been, or for that matter, to start having issues of not remembering employees who work with you by their first names, or for that matter, I was struggling with 4-digit extension numbers that I used to know regularly, or even acronyms in my field. It was really becoming a problem for me because I was a go-to guy and everybody's counting on me. And here I'm struggling to come up with these things. Give you an example. I mean, everybody used to use a copier and a fax machine, and I would struggle to even use something that simple. And here I was in charge of doing all these major things for data centers and keeping the whole operations running. So because of that, I thought something was wrong. I couldn't understand why I was struggling to do that. And it wasn't just in the workforce, it was also happening outside of the workforce. So, I mentioned it to 1 or 2 people in my workforce that were close to me, and they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. That's just a part of normal aging." So at the beginning, and it probably started before the age of 39, but again, that's about the age when I think I remember things about. And, for a while I kind of blew it off, but it just became too frequently happening to me. And I started writing things down to keep track of these things. And that's when I realized, wow, this is happening an awful lot. I got to do something about it.
Right. And one of the things you mentioned in your book is you would even have like a mini tape recorder, right, to keep track of things, right? I think that's like an example of, some of the issues that you're really having at that time, right?
Absolutely. I was not only recording myself, but I was recording what others were saying because I would have difficulty processing some of what they said. So if I didn't get it quite right, I could go back and listen to it later and make sure that I got their recording right. And, I kind of felt bad at the time because, you can't really record people without their knowledge. But hey, for me, it was a survival mode, because without it, I would have been in big trouble. I mean, I'd go to meetings and I had to act on what I said in the meetings. And if I couldn't recall what I said, I'd be in serious issues.
Right. And yeah, can you take us through, briefly the whole process of getting a diagnosis? It wasn't until like 10 years later from when you were 39 until you were 49 that you ultimately received the diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. Can you take us through that whole journey, that 10 years, in terms of some of the challenges that you face?
Sure. Well, for one, I started going to neurologist, I guess probably around 39, or should I say my regular doctor I started out with. And he didn't think there was any real issue. He did decide to send me to some doctors, and I went through all kind of testing, MRIs. I went to see neuropsych testers, and it came back that I had something, but they didn't realize what it was. As I continued going to see doctors, they finally came back, and one doctor made the conclusion that they thought I was stressed and depressed. So I finally ended up seeing this big major doctor at the University of Pennsylvania. And sadly to say, I went to him because of his expertise, but all he did was read my chart. And he read what the other doctor said, that he thought it was stress and depressed. And because of that, and he asked me who was the president at that time. And you got to remember, I was into politics and everything. And I couldn't even tell you who the president was. And I broke down crying. I literally broke down crying in his office. And he goes, see, you're stressed and depressed. He couldn't understand that the reason I broke down crying is because here I've gone through so much testing and I don't know what the answers are of what was happening to me. And that's why I broke down, because here is something I should have known, and it was something so simple, and I just couldn't handle it. So after meeting with him a few times, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere. And I got so frustrated with the medical community, not, in my opinion, doing their job, because like I said, once it's on your medical record, that's what they tend to go by. So I kind of gave up, and sadly to say, I ended up losing my job because of that. And I almost have the feeling that the people at my workforce knew I was pursuing this, but there's no way, of course, you can prove it. They ended up firing me for something else. But the thing they actually fired me for, in other parts of the organization, they just slapped them on the hand and said, oh, don't do it again. So it's kind of funny when you think of why you let me go.
And this is the company that we were talking about just now. So this is the Fortune 500 company that we
Correct.
were
Correct. Yeah.
So you're saying that they knew you were like pursuing a diagnosis for
correct
problems.
Yeah. And some of my employees by that time already knew I was having difficulties and struggling. And, I kind of said things to them, but again, I never told them officially what I thought was wrong or anything like that, but people knew around me knew. So I ended up actually, believe it or not, going for a job interview after that. And oh my God, you want to talk about embarrassments. Here I'm a high-level person, made a six-figure salary, and they asked me to give them a percentage of a math problem, something very simple. And I couldn't even figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. I'm here with the top people in the organization interviewing me, and I felt like this big. And I came up with the excuse, well, I need a calculator. So they gave me the calculator. And you want to talk about more embarrassment? I couldn't even figure out how to use the calculator. Oh my God, that was such an embarrassing day. So, of course, I didn't get the job. And I was shocked that day. I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought that was the end of my life. I really did. I ended up talking to a past boss of mine who worked at the other company, who had gone somewhere else. And he was now actually the second and third in command of another major Fortune 500 company, probably actually a 100. It was pretty big. And I told him about my situations. He knew I was struggling and all. And I told him I was looking for a job. I needed something. He was so kind that he found an opportunity for me within the organization as a contractor. He put me in touch with the people who were doing the hiring, and I ended up getting the job. What was supposed to be a 6-month gig turned out to be almost 4 years, but it was what I needed. I needed to buy time. And as soon as I got into that organization, I realized how much I really struggled to learn new. I mean, I was really having all kind of issues trying to understand what they were telling me. And keep in mind, this job was a simple job. This was not the kind of responsibility I had the other job. I was actually doing some very simple work there, and I took notes and notes and notes. I mean, such detailed notes that showed me how to do everything step by step by step as I went through the process.
And you had, we're talking about, you had like Post-it notes all over your cubicle, right?
Well, these were besides the Post-it notes. These were literally good notes that I took how to do the job and what I had to do step by step through the job. So I mean, these were unbelievable notes that anybody could step right in and follow. But what I found was, as you know, you get into a new job, you write notes and you take steps to make yourself informed on how to do things. But I found myself weeks and weeks and weeks later following step by step and step again. It's like, I couldn't get it. Why isn't this stuff sinking in my head? And I realized that I was struggling so much. So I started creating Post-it notes and all these things all over my cubicle. But I also realized I had to go back to doctors. I realized at that point, I'm really struggling here. I need help. So I started all over again with new medical doctors. And this time I made sure to not tell them that I went to other doctors in the past and that this was a new issue that I was addressing for the first time, even though I had problems with it many, many, many years before that. Well, this time we went a different route. And one of the doctors I remember called my wife in and he said, "Do you ever hear of Alzheimer's?" And my wife said, "Yeah, but what about it?" And my wife, keep in mind, is a medical nurse. And he says, "Well, I think your husband may have Alzheimer's disease. You might want to get that investigated." So we took his words, went back to my regular primary doctor. I'm sorry, not my primary doctor, but my neurologist at the time, and explained to him and shared the records with him. And well, sure enough, he ran PET scan at that time. That PET scan came back indicating that I had, I guess, what they would look for people who might have Alzheimer's. So I ended up getting sent to another neurologist who was more of an expert in neurology in the forms of dementia. And that person came to the conclusion that most likely that's what I had. And at that point, they also sent me to other doctors related in their network, and they were leaning towards either semantic dementia or possibly Alzheimer's. Well, it just so happened that NIH, National Institute of Health, was doing a medical trial and looking for people who had semantic dementia. And I have to tell you, I'm a lucky person. I really am. I've always fallen in the right places. And they sent my records to NIH, and NIH thought I did have that, and they wanted to have me in their clinical trials. So I was fortunate that I was asked at their expense to come down to Bethesda, Maryland, and be at the NIH Institute. And I was their only patient for 7 to 10 days. And they ran every possible type of study you could imagine. And what was great about their study, they were able to get the doctors and all the tests that they ran and correlated exactly to all the different issues and problems I was struggling with. So they came back and they thought that I did not have semantic dementia, but they definitely were leaning towards Alzheimer's disease. But again, keep in mind, this was a clinical trial. So what they put on records really isn't a part of my medical records. It's only for clinical trials. But when we left there, the medical doctors recommended that I pursue further with my regular doctors, and they were going to share their findings with them. Well, when I went back to my regular doctor pretty much came back conclusively that I did have Alzheimer's. And they recommended at that point in time that I definitely should no longer work because I was struggling and having all these difficulties. And that was also recommended in the neuropsych testing that I had. Based on that, I ended up filing with SSDI. And sadly to say, that took a long time. I had to get lawyers to help me out. And I think it was probably another 2-year process. And luckily for me, they were able to identify me and classify me as having Alzheimer's at that time.
Right.
and I was able to retire.
Right. And getting that diagnosis was actually quite a relief for you, right? I mean, especially after so long, you finally know at the time like what was wrong with you, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's sad because in my work, I had paid for all of long-term disabilities. I would have been entitled to all my benefits for the rest of my life if I would have left that Fortune 500 company. And sadly, because I was fired, I lost it all. So to be honest with you, here I was making a six-figure salary, and now I wouldn't be able to have anything. And luckily that I was able to get SSDI, because if it wasn't for that, I don't know what would have happened. I mean, it would have been really serious for me. I probably would have ended up after selling my home and everything else.
Right. And how did your wife react then to the diagnosis at the time?
Well, like I said, as a medical person, she was very surprised. But once she learned what the doctor said, she went back and did further checking and research in what it meant to be a person with dementia. And she said she was surprised. I fit all the criteria after she looked at it all. But most people don't tend to think somebody at my age, again, keep in mind, this was now 49, that they determined I had some form of dementia. And nobody wants to label you with that. It all depends where you live at, because in some states you lose your driver's license. You definitely lose a lot of your civil rights when it comes to having dementia. And sadly to say, there's no cure for it. So why would anybody want to put something like that on your medical record unless there's some kind of benefit?
Right. And after a diagnosis, you also started participating in like clinical trials, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in joining like clinical trials then?
Sure. I had spoken to one of the doctors who made my diagnosis, and she actually had recommended that I reach out to the Alzheimer's Association to further pursue what I was good at, and she thought I could do good in advocacy. So as part of my advocacy, I actually learned from the Alzheimer's Association that there were all these clinical trials out there, and sadly to say, people just weren't getting into them, who had dementia, or the ones who were getting into them were getting into them for the wrong reasons. They were getting into them because they wanted a cure. But unless people got into these clinical trials, they're never going to be able to find a cure. So I said, hey, if I could help, let me get into clinical trials. I mean, that's the least I could do. And I started researching all these different clinical trials out there, and I got into, oh my God, over the years, probably about 10, 15 different clinical trials. And, some of them weren't so good, because I'll tell you, sometimes you have some side effects and things like that, but I just continued pushing because to me, the way I look at it, my life was over. But the least I could do is help somebody else in the future, that somebody else didn't have to deal with what I was dealing with. And that was my goal. And I got into all kind of different types of clinical trials. You name it, I was in them. As long as they would take me, I'd go in them.
Right. And there was one study, right, where you actually received an amyloid PET scan, and the results from that really led you to like question whether you actually have Alzheimer's, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that experience then?
Sure. That was, I guess, probably about 3 years ago. I'm not sure that was my last clinical trial, but I think I've been in 2 since then. But that was a study done by Eli Lilly. And by this time, it seems like the people who were doing clinical trials for dementia, they were getting smarter. They were trying to now verify people had certain biomarkers before they would allow you into the clinical trials, which was very different than years when I first got started in this. And the reason they were checking out for these biomarkers was they were looking for biomarkers that would, I guess, identify that you most likely had Alzheimer's. And in this clinical trial I got into, they were doing a PET scan that was looking for amyloid, because amyloid is a key part of having Alzheimer's, besides the tau. So they wanted to do this amyloid PET scan on me before they would have me continue into the full trial process and invest all that time and money into me. Well, surprisingly, it came back that I did not have the amyloid. And that was a great relief on the one hand, but to be honest with you, that kind of left me feeling very weird, because for years I was going out there telling the whole entire world that I had Alzheimer's, but now I didn't. So what did I have? I don't know. But luckily for me, they weren't able to tell me anything when they told me at the clinical trial. They pretty much said, well, Mike, we can't use you. You don't have Alzheimer's, so go home and don't bother applying for other Alzheimer's trials because they're not going to take you. And that was true. I mean, I got to tell you, nobody else wanted to touch me because I had to tell them, hey, I don't have Alzheimer's. And the minute you tell them that, even though it wasn't officially on the medical record, at least I knew that. So I had to, be honest with these people and tell them that. Once people knew that, they didn't want to touch me. So I am lucky because I have a lot of key people all over the world who are in top positions in the dementia field. And I told them, look, this is what's happening. What do you think? And they said, well, Mike, you're falling into a new category that a lot of people who are getting this amyloid PET scan is falling into, because they also don't have the amyloid, and they're calling this new category called SNAP, S-N-A-P. Again, I don't know what it's called, what that stands for. You'll have to say that.
I'll say it for the audience. I have it written down. Suspected non-Alzheimer's pathophysiology. So
they determined about 30 to 33% of these people were falling into this new category. And basically, it's a category that means nothing other than that they don't fall in the same category as people who had Alzheimer's. So after that, I had been already talking with many top doctors in the world, and some of them already believed that I did not have Alzheimer's, and they believed I had semantic dementia. And my other doctor who was already seeing me, he said, well, it's a possibility that it's Alzheimer's, or it could be that it could be semantic dementia, which falls under the FTD category. He goes, but we just don't know yet. He goes, they just may not know enough about Alzheimer's yet that it might be another category of Alzheimer's. So 3 of my doctors agreed that yes, most likely it is FTD semantic. And this other one's coming around to it, thinking the same. But again, in my view, since I've learned so much because of being an advocate in this field, I learned at NIH, people who had one type of dementia listed on their death certificate. Well, it turns out when they did the biopsies, 60% had 4 types of dementia, 50% had 3 types of dementia. And I might have that reversed, those 2 numbers, I'm not sure. But the bottom line is they didn't have one type of dementia. It was a mixed form of dementia. So I tend to believe they may all be right. And I may end up having multiple types of dementia. But they ain't going to know that until they can do a biopsy on me. And so far, they haven't been able to figure out how to do that when you're still alive. So I guess we'll have to wait till I'm dead.
Right. But currently, your official diagnosis the official diagnosis is still Alzheimer's, right? That's still the official.
Correct.
Right.
I'm not sure if my other medical doctor that I saw since has accepted it as being semantic dementia. I think he wrote both down, to be honest with you, because I don't think anybody really knows. I think he was probably just as stumped as anyone else. And at this point, I just go with, I tend to tell people it's easier for me to just say dementia, just because I really don't know. And I sure hate to be in the shoes again to say that I have semantic dementia, and then all of a sudden that comes back to bite me again. So
Yeah.
I think it's safer to just say dementia.
Right. So like, how about for yourself then? Like, how do you like today, how do you make sense of all this uncertainty? Like, is it Alzheimer's or is it FTD? Like, yeah, how do you make sense of it then?
Well, the thing that's important to know is it's progressive. And that's probably the most important part to know about this disease, is that there will be an end to my life because of it. But I've also got a great appreciation for the science and how complex this disease is. So I totally understand why it's so complex to figure out. And because of that, it makes it very easy for me to live with not knowing. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how complex it is for them to figure this out. And it takes so long to figure out. And for a doctor to meet with you for 15 minutes, a half an hour, or an hour, that's just not enough time. It's just not enough time for any doctor to make the proper decision. And when I see these super smart doctors trying to figure this out, and I see how much they struggle, and they're dealing with nothing but people with dementia who are the tops in their field, it's no wonder that nobody knows. It's no wonder. So we have to get better at identifying biomarkers. We have to get better at the science. We have to get better in pharma. And so many people, get so upset at pharma over this. I mean, I saw what it took to make a drug. I was actually invited in a major pharma company. I won't tell you who they are, but I saw the whole process from the beginning to the end of making that drug. And it was so cumbersome, and it involved so much. And believe it or not, it took over 6 months to make the drug, just to make the drug. That was not to put it out on the market. That was just to make it internally. So you could imagine what these companies, I mean, there's Eli Lilly out there. My God, they've been at this for 30 years, 30 years. Can you imagine how much money these companies wasted trying to come up with the proper product, and they've been unsuccessful? People were jumping at Biogen, who just came out with this drug that hit the market, I think in the last 4 or 5 months, and they were asking $56,000 for this drug.
Well, they lowered the price.
To $28,000. But I can understand why they would want that kind of money. Just think how many years they've had to invest into this. So when companies say they're asking for this kind of money, you got to think, what did these companies have to invest to come up with a cure? That's what people don't envision. I mean, there was one drug out there.
So Michael, back to your point then about you appreciating how complex Alzheimer's and just in general dementia is, right? You appreciating how complex it is makes it easier for you to make sense of why there's still so much uncertainty about your ultimate diagnosis, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, got it. And how about in terms of your work in advocacy for folks living with dementia? I think for a lot of people living with dementia, when they get a diagnosis, they feel like life is over, that and that's the end, right? But for you, a big part of what you're trying to do is to be involved with advocacy, to lay out the roadmap for other people. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, what do you think about what like living well with dementia means? Because that's a phrase that we often use, right? Living well with dementia. Like, what does that mean for you? Like living well with dementia.
Well, I actually invented living life to the fullest with dementia about 10 years ago. And that was when I was trying to do my, I can't think what it's called, a list of when you're going to die. What's that called?
Your will.
No, my bucket list.
Yeah, yeah.
And I realized then that, hey, I don't have a lot of time. So I got to figure out how to enjoy the rest of my life as quickly as I can and enjoy it. So I created this bucket list and I went skydiving. I did all these great things. And it was fabulous. To me, what you have to do is do your homework and understand what's around the corner with this disease. It's like a curvy road. And you're going to hit obstacles, but you got to figure out how to get around them. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And I think if you go with the attitude that you expect the worst of this disease, that if you have a good day, then it's a great day. And I think that's how you have to look at it. And I'm lucky because I surrounded myself with a lot of great people. My wife, my daughter, and they all look out for me. And I have all these people that I've been advocating with, and that gives me a sense of purpose to do what I still love. I was a workaholic, so I needed something to do nonstop. So now that advocacy is my nonstop. I mean, I've been accomplished what no other person with dementia has been able to accomplish. I've been able to speak at the World Health Organization in Geneva. I've had 3 letters written in the Congressional Record. I am listened to by the top CEOs around the world for dementia and other CEOs. So I have a sense of purpose now. And that keeps me going. I'm telling you, that's my lifesaver. That's what's helping me fight this dementia. I'm not going to win the battle. But I got to tell you, it's not going to be an easy battle for dementia.
And anything next on your bucket list that you're looking forward to?
Oh my God, yes. I've been trying to travel for the last 2 years and we can't travel because of this COVID. And my God, I can't begin to tell you how the impact that has had on the poor dementia community and all these people. But no, I'm looking forward to get back into travel. And, we just had another travel plan in April that we had to cancel. And now our next one's next year. And this is really frustrating because I don't have a lot of time left. And I'm trying to make the good memories with my wife, but I don't want to put my wife at risk. For me, it's not a big deal, but I don't want to put her at risk.
Right. Well, I'm glad that, you're able to be at this live talk today to continue doing what you love doing, which is advocating for people living with dementia, right? That really helps you have that sense of purpose in life, right? As you mentioned. And yeah, I think, is there anything else, Michael, that you'd like to add that I haven't asked you?
No, I would just encourage for all people out there who are living with dementia, not only the people who are living with dementia, but also their caregivers and any family who is impacted by this. This disease is very different. We need people out there to be the squeaky wheels for those of us who no longer can speak, who no longer can write, who have lost their minds. I've spoken to governments and they all say, well, we don't have people talking for this. Well, that's because most of them are all dead. So we need people to stand up for us.
Mm. All right. Well, thank you, Michael, for sharing your thoughts. And for our audience, if you miss any of this live talk, it'll be uploaded to YouTube. And if you haven't signed up to our newsletter, feel free to go to our website to sign up. And thank you all. Bye.